it's like to be a father, why we say what we say, why we do what we do, why we are who we are. Well, the single man says I'm doing time. Your marriage and a mortgage is a dead end of life. Being stuck in a house must drag you down. You can only have fun if you go downtown. Oh, but family life is the life for me. I got the woman and the kids and DirecTV. I got an iPhone 4 with an 8 gig drive, and a daddy boy can survive. Daddy boy can survive. Change light bulbs all day long, trim up the hedges and mow the lawn. I can put on my cleats when the day is through, play slow pitch and go 0 for 2. And I can stand 30 minutes in a grocery line, and a daddy boy can survive. Daddy folks can survive. In a big soft chair and taking out the trash in my underwear. I like gold guitars and new Corvettes, chicken fried steak and P90X. Bring it! I like flip-flops and sweet iced tea. I got movies for the kids in the SUV. Tie a necktie and I pay all of my bills online, cause a daddy boy can't survive. Daddy boy can't survive. I play dolls with my daughter and war with my son, get shot in the butt with an airsoft gun. Winnie the Pooh, green eggs and ham, if you ain't into that, we don't really care. Change a diaper and give a high five, and a daddy boy can survive. Daddy boy can survive. Daddy folks can survive. Oh, daddy boy can survive.
Well, happy Father's Day. Hope you, we have a bunch left over of these barbecue sauces, so I hope you get one if you want to take two. They're all the same. Some of them have different labels, but it's the Mad Housewife is what it's called from Little Barbecue Joint, and I'm not going to comment on that at all, but it's the medium, so it's not super hot and it's not sweet. It's the medium. Anyways, all right, so happy Father's Day. I was going to tell you about this cowlick that I have on my head. Right here, you really can't, you might not be able to tell too much because I use a lot amount of hair. That don't sound right, but I use a lot of gel on my hair, right? For that reason, because I got that from my dad, though. My dad had the same cowlick, and he never put gel in his hair, so his was just like, you know, and but that's what one of the things I inherited from my dad. Another thing I inherited from my dad was well, besides his bad temper, sometimes I struggle with that, and lack of patience, right? When people hear my last name, I have a Mexican last name, and somebody's calling me. They should be here at church. I don't know why they're calling me. But people, because my dad was my dad looked Mexican, and I don't, but I just tan really easy. But people ask me, do you know any Spanish? And I just say, my dad didn't teach me Spanish. He taught me a few cuss words in Spanish. That's all I know. And so that was another thing I inherited from him. But I feel like I have a good work ethic, and I did get that from my dad. I watched my dad growing up. He was just a hustler. He was always doing something, and so you pick up good things and bad things from your dad. Like some of you guys, maybe you smoke because you watched your dad smoking growing up, and so you kind of inherited that. Maybe you have the hair color or the eye color that you have, and that was from your dad or something like that. So we have things, habits that we pick up from them, but also things that we can't control. And I guess before I go any further, this is, I'm probably going to be crying in a little bit, tell some emotional things about my story. And I just want to say, I know that Father's Day can be hard because there's people in this room that your dad's not here and you would love to have one more conversation with him. And you just got to take that to God. That's the only thing you can do. You know what I mean? Like, you have to go to God and just pour out your heart to him. And God is our perfect Heavenly Father. So here's something that I didn't get from my dad. When I tell you this will be no shock to any of you guys, but I have a proclivity towards sin, like a bent towards sin. And so do you, before you start judging me. Like, we have this bent towards doing the wrong thing. And I do too. I've had it my whole life. And it's called disobedience, right? I saw that in this little kid. Friday night we had the movie night, and there was this kid here, and he was running around. His parents weren't here; he was with someone else, and so he was running around, and he wanted to go play down by the street, and I was like, "No, you need to come watch the movie. Quit running in and out of the church and all this." And he just wouldn't listen, and he did this like. He was like right outside the door, and he wanted to go this way to the street, and I was like, "No, you need to come over here." And he goes, "Okay, I will." And then he just stepped this way, and I was like, I started reaching for my belt, and then I realized, I was like, that's not my kid. I can't do that, right? Can't spank someone else's kid. But we have that bent towards doing the wrong thing. And now here's what I want to talk about. You know where I got that from? I didn't get that from my dad necessarily. I got my sin nature from, do you know who? Nah. Well, in a general way, maybe, but I got it from Adam. This is what I'm going to show you today. If you have a Bible, we're in Romans chapter 5, and we've been going through and doing a study on the book of Romans, and we're in chapter 5 now. We're going to start in verse 12. But here's what the Bible teaches us while you're turning there, or you can watch it up on the screen. But I have what's called a sin nature, and so do you. Even though when I got saved, okay, God gave me a new nature now that I have the Holy Spirit living inside of me. But that old nature is still there. It's just like riding a bike. Come on, you might not have ridden a bike for 60 years, and you still remember how to ride a bike. You can jump on a bike, and you might crash, but you remember what that's like. And you still know how to sin. And it doesn't matter how long I've been a Christian, these old tendencies, this old thought patterns in my life are still there, and I struggle with that. So let me tell you where that came from. I told you it comes from Adam. Let me tell you the story about that. Most of you guys are really familiar with it. But when God created the whole world, and then he created Adam, and he said everything was good, and of course Adam was on earth for a little while, and he was lonely, and so God said it's not good for man to be alone, and all the wives in here said amen. And so God said, I'm going to make a companion for you. So he went back to the drawing board, and he was like, I can do a little bit better than the first time. So he made some improvements, and he made a woman. And he brought her to Adam, and they got married and lived happily ever after. Well, not so much. So, they were in these perfect conditions. So God took Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, and it was perfect. There was no sin, there was no death, there was nothing. And he goes, okay, I'm going to put you in the Garden of Eden. He goes, and you can eat everything. He was like, just look around all of these trees and all the fruit. It's paradise. You can have whatever you want except for the fruit on one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God said, on the day that you eat that is the day that you shall surely die. So he laid it out. They knew the consequences. And so here's, like there was all these fruit, and I'm just going to have a little creative license with this. I don't know how it went down. So when he placed them in the garden and he left them there, was like, don't eat of this tree right here. Come on, you know what that's like. I've always said, in recovery group, if you go to the barbershop long enough, eventually you're going to get a haircut. And so if this tree is forbidden from you, you should probably steer clear of it. Like we see in addiction recovery with alcoholics who used to, sometimes they have to drive home a different way from work because they don't want to pass by that old liquor store they used to. It's just ingrained in us, right? So God said, okay, you can eat anything, but stay away from this tree. And so theologians have said, I've read stuff where they've said it might have been up to 100, like Adam and Eve might have been 100 years old before they ate of the fruit. We don't know, like the time frame would fit, but it might just be seconds or the day. So I'm just going to have a little fun with this because in my mind, here's how it went. God said, Adam and Eve, you guys can eat of whatever you want, just this, and I don't think it was an apple. We don't know what fruit it was. But he was like, just don't eat of the fruit from this tree right here. And they said, yes, sir, we will obey you. And I think that he went, okay, now you guys wait right here. I got to go over here and do something. And he turned his back, and then he heard this. You know what I mean? He did it. He was like, sorry. And I said, now I got to eat this. I did this in first service too. Now, I don't know if it went down like that, but I think he did that. I think he was like, stay away from this tree. Don't eat that. And they said, we won't. And as soon as he turned around, he heard the chomping from fruit. And they brought disobedience into the world, right? Because that's how we are too. That's how you are. The forbidden thing is just so tempting to you. And we've all blown it. We've all messed up in that way. So I want to show you, because Adam did that, because Adam sinned one time. And by the way, let me talk about this for a second. This is Father's Day, okay? It's not Mother's Day, but I've looked at this before because I had some real questions about that. Because I'm like, well, wait a minute. When this talks about, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get into this in Romans 5. It says in verse 12, it says, when Adam sinned, sin entered into the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone has sinned. So the thing about that is, why doesn't it say that Eve brought sin into the world? Why doesn't it say that Eve brought death? Because there's a reason. Because God looked at that, and it wasn't Eve's responsibility. It was Adam's. See, as we go through this, you may disagree with me. If you were raised in America and you see the way our culture is going, there's blurring of the gender lines and the roles of mother and father and husband and wife. And I really don't care what Hollywood teaches or talks about. I don't really care what anybody thinks, because at the end of my life, I'll stand before God, and I'm going to stand on God's word. And these things have been true since the beginning of time, and they never will go away. So there's always going to be a father and a mother, and little children need a mother and father in their life. They need that. God created human beings with that as the whole purpose behind that, right? So we have that need for that. But whenever the serpent slithered up or walked up to Eve and he goes, hey, you need to eat this, and she gave in and she brought the fruit to her husband, that's what the Bible says, and said, here, eat this, and he took a bite. Sin didn't come into the world when Eve did it. Sin came into the world when Adam did it, because he was the spiritual leader of the home, and it was his responsibility. Now, what I want you to understand about that is that one act of disobedience, what the Bible says, that brought death, it brought sin. And let's go on in verse 13. It says, well, at the end of verse 12 there, he says, for everyone has sinned. So, okay, so before you get too hard on Adam, you need to understand that you would have done the same thing. You're a sinner too. Everyone in this room has sinned, right? Some of you guys sinned on the way here today with the argument with your kids and your wife. That's why I highly recommend that husbands and wife drive separately to church. Can I get an amen? I'm just saying, me and my wife have been doing that for years, and it just eliminates so much stress trying to get anyways. So is she in here? She's right there. She agrees with me. She agrees. So we all sin. Everyone in this room sins. Sins are just disobedience against God. And so, did someone just go over and give my wife a hug? She doesn't need. It's Father's Day. It's not Mother's Day. So we've established that, right? Everyone. And if you think I'm not a sinner, okay, well, call me this week and come in and we'll sit down and I will show you where you're a sinner at, because we all are. We're just all in the same boat. we're human, and we all make mistakes. We all sin against God. So here's what happened. Verse 13 says, yes, people sinned even before the law was given, but it wasn't counted as sin because there was not any law to break yet. It says, still, everyone died, but the time from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even those who did not disobey an explicit command of God as Adam did. Okay, and then he goes on. He goes, now Adam is a symbol, a representation of Christ who was yet to come. So let's just talk about that for a minute. And what if we back up? If you heard me say that, okay, it just says that they just didn't call it sin before the law. Okay, everyone was still sinning. It's always been the same since the beginning of time. So what I want to talk to you about today is legacy, is a father's legacy. But let's talk about Adam's legacy, because Adam left a legacy. Whenever he disobeyed God, when he did that one single act of disobedience, it brought sin into the world, and it brought consequences with it. And I say this all the time, but I need you to listen again, because your sin, the choices that you make, not even sin, just choices, positively or negatively, has consequences to them. They do. And people don't realize, and people want to brush it under the carpet, but the decisions that you're making with your life today have a ripple effect, and it affects other people. Now, Adam's one sin, he didn't think, you know what, if I take a bite of this fruit, this is going to bring pain and suffering and death to billions and billions of people for thousands of years. He didn't think that. He just thought, well, he wasn't thinking, because when we sin, we have blinders on, and we're just focusing on the moment. So his one single act of disobedience created all this chaos that we have in our lives today. And so we got to be mindful about what we do, because that's true for us too. Let me give you 3 things in your notes if you take notes. This is directed towards fathers, and I have 3 thoughts that I want to say. The first one is this: fathers have a major influence in their family. And you may say, yeah, I know that, but I want you to know how big it is, how much influence. In fact, I would argue that, well, in some ways, the father has a bigger influence than the mother. Now, again, God created roles. God created the role of mother and father, and each of those play a vital role in the household. And so mothers just can't do the jobs that fathers do, and fathers can't do the jobs that were given to mothers by God. It's just the way that it is. And so kids need both. Now, here's the thing about that. Here's the thing about parenting. And my wife's in here, like I said, and we're raising 4 kids right now. And I would love to stand up here and tell you that we're doing everything right. We're not. I mean, she is, but I'm the one that fails most of the time. You know why? Because it's hard. Kids are evil. No, I'm just kidding. Kids are hard to they are. So are you. But kids are just hard to parent. And so many people in this room, you might be able to relate to this, but we have parents in this room that go to our church that struggle as a dad. But the thing is, you didn't have a perfect dad either, and your dad didn't have a perfect dad. So it's just this endless cycle of bad parenting, and maybe you had a good dad, and maybe you had a bad dad. It doesn't matter, but we all live in this fallen world, and so we're all trying to do the best we can with what God's given us. So the second thing I want to say about it is fathers' actions have consequences that affect generations, and I think you would agree with that if you think about it. So the best thing that we could do, the best thing as a father, because if you get overwhelmed, and it is overwhelming at times, but the best thing that we can do is just be faithful to God, right, and show them what it looks like, and because the decisions that I'm making positively and negatively, so I want to be faithful in church because I want my kids to know that church is important. I want to be faithful to reading the Bible every single day because I want my kids to catch me reading the Bible and praying and doing godly things, because when they grow up, I want that same thing for them. Now, something you should also practice as a dad in here is learning to say you're sorry. Just being I think kids really do appreciate transparency when you lose your temper. Come on. I always feel convicted whenever I talk about this, how sometimes I lose my temper with my kids and snap on them, and right, because they're just acting crazy. And I know no one else in here does that, but you know what I try to do afterwards? I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice. I'm just going through a lot. But the decisions that we make in our life, right? Like by you choosing to come to church and bring your kids to church, you don't really understand that right now, but God is working in your kids' life. Like right now, they're over there learning Bible lessons in a way that they can understand. And it's going to have a monumental impact in their life. So I want to tell you this story about, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories today that are personal to me, and I might even have shared this one before, but if you're new to our church. So when I got saved 24 years ago, I was in prison and for selling drugs. And when I got out, I started going to church and here in town. And I just remember having this conversation with my mom one time, a few months after I got out of prison, and just asking her, I was like, do we have any other Christians in our family? Because I was trying to think of this. I was like, I don't know of any other Christians in our family. I just couldn't think of any. I was trying to go through the whole list, and there was a couple of relatives that I had that are, went to Catholic church, but they didn't ever go, and their lives were just train wrecks. And so I was like, I don't know about them. And I asked my mom, and she was like, your cousin Rocky is a minister. He was a youth pastor. It's like, oh yeah, I do remember that. And then she was like, and everyone in his family goes to church. And I was like, I think I remember that a little bit. And I started getting to know them. And so I called my cousin Rocky, and we had a good conversation. And he was telling me, and his family, they were telling me about my grandpa. He goes, you didn't know that you have a great grandfather who was a pastor? I was like, I didn't know that. And so he started telling me the story. My great grandfather, my dad's grandfather, he was from Mexico. Our whole family was from Mexico, and he brought us over in like the 1930s. They all came, not us, but he came over from Mexico, and they all lived downtown. And he actually started a church out in Kansas, somewhere in Kansas City, Kansas. And it was a small church. This would have been in like the late 1930s. They just told me stories about him, how faithful he was. They were like, sometimes it would snow like 11, 12 inches on Saturday night, and he would be like, I'm still going to church. And sometimes it would just be him. But he was like, I need to be at church because somebody might show up that needs to hear about Jesus. And they were like, he was just so faithful. And they also told me other things about him, and how they said that he used to pray. He would pray for the whole family. He had a list of all the family members. And then when he would get to the bottom, he would pray for the kids and grandkids that hadn't been born yet. And I was like, that's me. Because I swear, I felt like, I told my mom this one time, I said, I feel like someone's been praying for me. You ever felt like that before? Someone just praying for you? And I really, just with all my heart, I believe it was my grandfather's prayers before he died, before I was even born, I believe. And so I didn't know him, he didn't know me, but he had been praying for me. And so I don't want you to underestimate the power of the Father's prayers and the impact that your life has. Now, it goes both ways, like I said, positively and negatively. So I'll just move to the next one. Go to the third one. Third thing is I want to say, a father's words are powerful. Now, it's not in your notes, but it'll be on the screen. Go to the next slide. Proverbs 18:21 says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Now, listen to me. I want everyone to look up here for a second, because this is so, I don't even know that I can communicate this, but like after the last service, I had somebody come up to me, and I won't tell you who it is, but it was a woman in our church, and she's elderly, and we were just talking, and she goes, when you were talking about stuff up there, she goes, I don't remember my dad ever telling me in my whole life that he ever loved me. That just broke my heart. And what I started thinking about that is, listen, there's dads in here and moms. You need to go home today if you have the ability to. Go, just sit your kids down and say, listen, I love you with all my heart. I'm amazed at how many parents just assume that their kids think they love them or know that they love them, right? You're like, well, I demonstrate it. I put food on the table, don't I? Or I provide for them, buy them clothes. No. Kids need to hear that they are loved. They need to hear come out of your mouth that I love you. I love you unconditionally. You will always be my son, or you will always be my daughter, no matter what choices you make. They need to hear that. And they don't just need to hear it one time. They need to hear it repeatedly. You need to learn to say it. Because if you're like me, like I'm just being honest, growing up, my whole life, I never heard my mom or dad tell me they love me. Now, I always knew that my mom did love me, but I don't think I ever heard it. And she was in the first service, and I would tell her to her face. You know, we have a great relationship. But it's just important that kids hear it because they need to know that, okay? So be sure you do that. But the life and death are in the power of the tongue. And so just think about, and you might even write off to the side, words of affirmation. Your kids need to hear words of affirmation. They need to hear it come out of your mouth that they are loved by you, that you approve of their life, that you don't approve of everything they do. Obviously, when it's time to correct them and discipline them, you do that, but you need to make sure and build them up because you have power in your mouth, like for everybody. Like you can absolutely destroy somebody's life and you can absolutely build somebody up. And there are people in this room that you probably heard something like you're an adult now and something that your dad said to you as a child, said something mean or negative to you, and that's like a bell that just rings in your head, and it's like a thing that you play over and over again. And I'll just tell you, if that's you need to seek counseling. You need to go, because there are some things that we need to go and just unload this on another person in counseling and let them pray with us and point us to God. But just be sure, if you're a parent, just be sure and give your kids words of affirmation. And my wife and I have dealt with this and seen people in our years of ministry, especially downtown when we were in the inner city, parents who would tear their kids down. You know why? Because misery loves company. And I've seen moms who were just, her life was a train wreck, and she wanted to destroy her kids too. And I'm like, what are you doing, right? Get your life together. And don't ruin your kids' lives. So don't ever, I'm just going to say this, don't ever, when you're frustrated, mad, don't ever say mean things to your kids. If you're going through something in life, you better figure it out. Go get counseling yourself. But you will absolutely destroy your kids' lives if you say mean things to them. And when you do snap on your kids or blow, just apologize. Just say, hey, I'm sorry. I'm working on this. I'm getting better. God's convicted me about this. Okay, so just work on that. So let's talk about this next thing. So I told you in Romans 5:12 that Adam messed it up for all of humankind. Okay, but the Bible goes on and it says, even though Adam messed it up, God sent a hero. And who was the hero? Come on, you know who it is. Jesus. Jesus was the hero. Jesus is always the hero. He's the hero of my story and your story. Jesus is the hero. So God sent, let's just start in verse 15, and I'm going to read it. It says, but there is a great difference between Adam's sin and God's gracious gift. For the sin of one man, Adam, brought death to many, but even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of forgiveness to many through this other man, Jesus Christ. Verse 16 says, and the result of God's gracious gift is very different from the result of the one man's sin. For Adam's sin led to condemnation, but God's free gift leads to our being made right with God, even though we are guilty of many sins. For the sins of this one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many, but even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of righteousness. For all who receive it will live in triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ. Verse 18, he says, yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation to everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and a new life for everyone. And I'm just going to stop right there because that's kind of a tongue twister. He keeps repeating it in different ways. But he's saying Adam's one act of disobedience messed everything up and brought death and sin. So God was in heaven, and he's like, okay, if I'm going to fix this, I'm going to have to send my own son. So he sent Jesus down 2,000 years ago, and he died on the cross, and he became the substitute for you and I, okay? And so he fixed it all. So that's why Jesus is the hero of the story. Now, let me talk about this one thing really quick before I move to this last part. So I said earlier that we have different roles, mothers and fathers, and I know there's mothers in the room who you guys do a great job, but I want to talk specifically just to the dads for a minute, because I do believe that this is your job, okay? So in the Old Testament, there's a thing, you might have heard this before, but it talks about the sins of the father are passed down to the children, to the third and fourth generation. You ever heard that before? It's said numerous times. And the gist behind it is it's the ripple effect. The things that we're doing right now are like, and I don't think when I'm doing something, or if I choose to disobey God, I'm really not thinking, gosh, is this going to affect my great grandkids? But it does. It does. So what he's saying is the things that a person does, those sins are passed down to the children, to the third and fourth generation. I'll give you an example, because this will help you. You'll understand it this way. So there's people in this room who are alcoholics, or you struggle with alcoholism. You've been an alcoholic at one time, and so if we would dig into your life, we would find out that your dad was an alcoholic, and then if we would dig in a little bit further, we would find out that his dad was an alcoholic. And maybe his dad. And that really is how it works. Like I know people who their great-grandfather decided one day to pick up a bottle and start getting drunk and couldn't put it down and became an alcoholic. And then his kids grew up with that, and his son became an alcoholic. And then his son became an alcoholic. And you get it, honestly, it's still no excuse. God is still greater, but I'm just telling you, that's how it happens. So if you choose to be an alcoholic and you choose not to get help for that, you can almost chalk it up. Your kids will be alcoholics or addicts, whatever your problem is. If you smoke, your kids are probably going to smoke. If you cuss, your kids are probably going to cuss. Whatever you struggle with, whatever bad habits you have, kids take that and they take it to the next level. They just do. And so we have to be mindful. Look, I'm not trying to browbeat anybody. I want you to understand that being a father is a heavy, heavy responsibility. And most people don't realize that because, look, I mean, I don't know if there's kids in here, so we can get pretty honest in here, but it doesn't take anything to make a kid. I mean, it takes a little bit, but that's it. You don't have to be a responsible individual, but it takes a lot to raise a kid, right? Anybody can make a baby, but it takes a real person. It takes a real man to raise a child. To raise them up and provide for them, and to go to work every day, and to come home and to be faithful to your wife, and to do those. To me, that's what a real man is. Okay, I don't care what our culture says and society says. But here's what I want you to understand. This is for all the dads in this room. Listen, whatever curse is on your family because of your great grandfather, the sins of that passed down to the third and fourth, that is on you as a father to break that curse, to break that cycle. You have a decision because Jesus is greater than whatever sin is being passed down from generation to generation. And you can break that cycle, and you can. And I've seen people in our church do it, okay? So just understand that that's your responsibility. God made you a father, and God gave you responsibilities. And so your job is to say, you know what? Maybe my dad was an alcoholic, and my great-grandfather, but it stops here, and I'm going to get right, and I'm going to get help. And then you don't have to worry about passing that on to your kids, right? You break that cycle. I want you to understand that that's your responsibility. So let's talk about, I want to give you, I think, 5 things to just kind of responsibilities for dads. Number 1 is you need to be an example, okay? If you're taking notes, just write that down. Be an example. Kids need to see how life is lived, right? You need to be an example of what it looks like to follow Christ, to live for Jesus, and they want to see that. They need to see that. That old adage, more is caught than what is taught, right? So don't talk to your kids and say, well, just do what I say, not as I do, because I promise you, they're going to do what you do. If they see you doing the wrong thing, they're going to do the wrong thing. So be that example. They need to know that. And I have already said this, but I just want to repeat it. Look, your kids know you're not perfect. So when you blow it, just apologize. There's something really powerful about transparency and vulnerability and just saying, hey, listen, Daddy was, woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and I was just short-tempered. And I'm sorry that I talked to you that way. Just own that and apologize about it. The next one, number 2, is be an instructor. Teach them how to live life. Like, show them, just like you do, teach them how to drive a car or how to fish. And then goes back to the first one, to be an example. Listen, if you don't fish, or if you don't know how to catch fish, then you're going to have a hard time teaching your kids how to catch fish, right? I made fun of Jeff and Chuck in the first service because they were in here, and that's like, they don't know how to catch big fish, so they're not going to teach their kids how to catch big fish. That's why they go with me. And then Terry reminded me that when me and Steve went to fish with him, he caught all the fish. So I will give him that, but that was a fluke. That was a one-time deal. Like, that's not going to happen again. But we need to instruct them. Like, teach your kids how, the instructions of life. Hopefully you're reading the Bible and living it out for yourself, and then teach that to your kids. It's really powerful. Number 3 is you need to be present and attentive. And those are 2 separate things. Being present is a bit like, just the presence of a father in the kid's life goes a long ways. But just because you're there in their presence doesn't mean that you're really there. Like, you need to be attentive. So that means put your phone down. Like, my wife is really good at this, and I struggle with this sometimes because I'm always busy. I'm always got something on my mind. But she really, and people don't do this very much, but my wife several nights a week will cook a big dinner and make everyone sit around the table, and she'll ask them how their day was, and I try to do that too. That's important. It really is important to try and do that. So do that at least one day a week. And just sit at the table and say, no phones, no computers, no tablets. Just put all that stuff away, and we're going to have a conversation as families. And what you'll find is our kids struggle with that because they are so addicted to technology. And you don't know how I'm this close to selling my house and moving my kids and my family to Alaska and building a cabin out in the middle of nowhere where there's no Wi-Fi. I'm serious. I'm like, that's what I want to do because we're so engaged. We're so addicted to technology. It's everywhere. We're constantly checking our phones. We're constantly looking on Facebook. And that's not healthy for us. And I've said this before, like, we go out to dinner and we see family of 4, and they all 4 got a phone in front of them. And like, you should have just stayed home. Like, you're not enjoying each other's company. So put the phone down and look your kids in the eye and say, hey, how was your day at school? How are you doing in life? They need to know that. Like, they need to hear that from their parents. So be attentive to what they're doing. Number 4 is be the spiritual leader of the home. And I feel like I've hammered that a lot, but gosh, I was just going to tell you, listen, it's not the wife's responsibility. It's not her responsibility to say, hey, this Sunday we're going to church. It is the dad. It's the father, the husband's responsibility to say, hey, I don't care what other families do. At our house, we're going to church. All right? That responsibility was given to you by the dad. Now, and I say that because even in our own church, I know I've talked to women who say, my husband just won't step up. He just won't step up and lead and be the leader of our family. And I just want to go to that person and say, do you understand what long-term damage, that ripple effect? You need to step up. You need to be the leader of your home. It's not her responsibility to be the spiritual leader. God gave that to the dads, to the fathers, to the husbands. All right? So just now that I've made everybody mad, let's move on. The last thing is I don't want this to be a complete downer message, so I just want you to be encouraged. Just realize that God looks at your life, and He knows you're human, just like He did with Adam, just like with everybody on planet Earth. He's like, I know you're human. I just want you to follow me and live for me and do and here's what God. I'm not exaggerating about this. God's looking at you going, you're struggling being a dad. You're struggling being a mom. You feel like you're just barely keeping your head above water. And God's like, I can help you with that. Like, and He has a church that can help you with that. And He really wants to step in. And so on these days where you struggle, you need to lean into God for encouragement and comfort. Okay? I want to tell you, end it with this story about my dad. And I'll probably end up crying about this, but I just wrote a book, and I wanted this disclaimer. We just released the second edition today because the first one was not right. If you read it, if you bought my book, I I'm supposed to get some of the new copies in. I'll give you a free copy of that because there was, in the final edit, it just was messed up. Like stuff got repeated, and there was some stuff left out that should have been left out, put in there. And so we fixed all that. And so anyways, but it's a story, the book is a story about my life, the first part, and then about basically how to help people in addiction recovery. And so in the story in the book I tell this story about my dad. And so to be honest with you, if you read the book, I don't pull any punches. Like I just it's a transparent story about my life, and I don't care who doesn't like it. You know what I mean? Like it was my story, and my dad said some horrible things to me growing up. So I'll just take you back a little bit. When I was 4 years old, my brother, who was a year older than me, died, and I tell the whole story in the book. But that was traumatizing to me, and I carried around this story for this secret about basically I'm the one that caught the car on fire that caused him to die, and no one knew that for 20 years, and so I carried around this secret with me, and it created a lot of pain and stuff in my life. And so my brother died because of that. And then when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my dad drank all the time. My dad was the type of alcoholic who would just binge drink. Like he would just go grab a case of beer and disappear for 3 or 4 days and come home drunk and start swinging on me and my mom and my sister and just say every horrible thing you can imagine. Well, one day we were working, and I was like 11 or 12, and he looked at me and he said, he was just frustrated and disgusted with something I did or didn't do, and he goes, "Why couldn't you have died instead of your brother?" And that just crushed me. And he said it a few other times on different days. And when he said that, it just really changed my perspective, because I kind of idolized him up until that point as my dad, and then I just hated him. You know what I mean? Like I was just like, I can't wait to get out of here. And that's when I started running the streets at age like 12 years old and staying from house to house. And so I just had all this hatred built up for my dad. And then when I'm 22 years old, I go to prison, get saved, and start going to church. Now I'm going to church, and I'm really burdened about my mom and dad's salvation. So I go talk to my mom, and my mom and dad didn't want anything. They didn't want Jesus, and so I kept talking to them about it. One day I went over and led my mom to Christ. She accepted Christ, and of course she goes here and is faithful, and what God's done in her life is amazing. It really is. But my dad, about a week later, accepted Christ into his life and was changed. But I guess I should back up, because when I was in prison, it's funny what God will use to cause you to hit your rock bottom. I probably wouldn't be here today. I probably wouldn't be a Christian if I didn't have to go to prison, just to be honest with you. God had to make sure that I went to prison so that I would hit my rock bottom. But when I was in prison, I called home one day, and I was talking with my dad, and he said, I just went to the doctor, and they said I have cirrhosis of the liver, and it's bad. My liver is shot. And he said, if I don't get a brand new liver, if I don't get a liver transplant, then I'm going to die. And so God used that to get his attention too. So he was dying. This was like maybe a year later. Okay, fast forward a year, he's starting to decline, and we went over there one night, and my friend Ralph Toll led him to Christ, and it was great. Now my mom and dad are both saved. We're all going to church together. It was kind of weird for me at first, because now I went to my mom and dad one time. I said, hey, I'm really glad that you guys got saved, but could you find your own church? Because this is mine. Like, I just feel awkward when you guys are here. You know, come on. Some of you guys know what that's like. But it was great. We were going to church together and growing, and everything was awesome. But I want to say this, because I was really glad that my dad got saved, and now he's in heaven now. But just because he got saved didn't change all the pain that I had in my heart. You know, all the scars, all the stuff that he said. It didn't erase all of that stuff. Okay, even an apology doesn't erase that stuff. It may heal it a little bit, but I say that because you guys know what that's like. There's people in this room that you need to seek counseling. Maybe you need to talk to somebody about the stuff that's going on in your life. The pain that was probably put there by your dad or your parents. It has a ripple effect in our lives. So you fast forward in my dad's life, or about a year after that. It's the summer of 1998, and I'm getting ready to go to Bible college at the end of the summer. God had called me to preach. And so my dad found out that his health started declining, and so they called him one day and said, we found a donor that matches your blood type, and they moved him to the front of the list. And so they said, come to the hospital because tomorrow we're going to do this liver transplant. So he goes to the hospital, and I go up to see him, and you have to read the book because I've told the whole story, but because in that hospital room is where I told them how my brother died. And it was the first time we never mentioned my brother's name growing up. It was just off limits. Well, my dad has the transplant, and things are looking up, and for about a week, things are going good. And then he starts taking a turn for the worse. And so about 2 or 3 weeks after the liver transplant, he really starts fading. And the doctors came in and told us, they said, listen, it didn't take, and there's nothing we can do. They said, your dad's got maybe a few days or a week to live, and that's it, and he's going to die. And the one thing that I remember about that is I remember him being so upbeat. I don't think I've ever seen anybody who was as positive as my dad was, knowing that he only had a few days to live. And the only way I can describe it or explain it is that he had a relationship with God that was amazing, and he knew he was going to heaven when he died. So before that happened, so a few days later, I went up to see him, and I remember it was like a week later, I was going to be going off to Bible college. And so I walked into the hospital room, and there was all these nurses there, and there was a few doctors, and I just remember it was weird. It was like an ER scene, like a movie scene or something. And he was super excited when he saw me, and he said, hey, gather, and he gathered all these nurses and doctors around, and he said, I want you guys to meet my son. He goes, this is my son, Joey. He goes, he's getting ready to go off to Bible college to become a preacher. And he just looked at me and he said, I'm so proud of you. And he told me that he loved me. And why that was important for me, because he never said that growing up. I never heard my dad say he loved me. Never heard him say he was proud of me. My mom was awesome. Like my mom, I played sports all growing up, and my mom came to every practice. She would run me around. My dad never came to one practice, never came to one game, never saw anything. And my mom was there. And so I just tell you that because I had all this stuff on my mind. And when my dad said that for me, it really did close up some wounds in me, but not everything. I just want you to understand that some things will always be scars on my heart just from that. And some of you guys know what that's like because that's happened to you too. But I want you to understand, the reason I told you that story is because I want to encourage you as a dad. I have this book right here. And Hillary gave me this book a few years ago, and I don't know if you can see it. It says the best is yet to come, and that's my favorite thing. I live my life by that because, you know what? I had a bad day yesterday. I did, and the day before. I had a bad week. You know what I mean? I've struggled lately, just with my mind and my thoughts and discouragement or whatever. But you know what? Tomorrow's going to be better. And I'm not confessing anything to you. I'm just saying I live my life like that. If I have a bad day today, if I say something that I regret, if one of you comes up and says, I didn't like that, and I think to myself, some bad thoughts about you, God forgives, and God's like, tomorrow's going to be better. Because when God looks at you, I promise you, I say this all the time, but I'm not just making this up. God, when he looks at you, he doesn't see all of the garbage and all of your sins. He sees the you that could be you, the future you, if you would just put him first each and every day of your life. And so I love this book. I keep this in my office. And the thing about this book, it's kind of like a journal, but it's got blank pages here. And when she gave it to me, I'm like, I'm not going to use it as a journal. This is a blank book because the best is yet to come. And I don't know what my future holds, but I know that my tomorrow is going to be better than my yesterday. And if you live your life, if you put God first every day of your life, your tomorrow is going to be better than your past. Your future is going to be better than your past. And so everyone in this room, if you're a parent, you've made mistakes. You've blown it. You know what? You got a blank book from now until the rest. Even if your kids are grown, you go home today, and if they're around, just sit them down, call them, and just say, hey, I love you so much. Just let them know. Don't assume that they know that, okay? And just understand that tomorrow will be better if we put God first in our life. Let's all bow our heads, and let's close our eyes. And let's just think about that. Dads, let's break that cycle that's been going on in our lives. This cycle of screaming at kids and cussing and drinking and doing all these things, smoking, just whatever bad habits that that's been a part of your family, the curse that's been passed down from generation to generation. Let's stop that. Let's be people who go to church faithfully. Let's be people, let's be dads who read our Bible every single day and pray to God every day and show our kids what it looks like to walk with God. And to show them, say, hey, listen, I didn't get it right today. Because you tell your kids when you grow up, there's going to be days you don't get it right either. But that's what's awesome about God is there's forgiveness. And every day is brand new. God's mercies are brand new for us each and every morning. That's what's so wonderful about God. He never holds a grudge. He never harbors bitterness towards us. He just looks at us and says, let's try better tomorrow. Let's try again tomorrow. It's going to be better tomorrow. And I'm so grateful because I made so many mistakes as a parent. And I know that God's got better for us, for me, and for you. And listen, if you're sitting there teared up and crying right now, you might need to see a counselor. You call the office, me, Chuck, there's other people on staff. We'll sit down and talk with you. You may need to go see a professional counselor and some long-term stuff. But let's make sure that our kids know, moms and dads in this room, even if they're adults, let's make sure they know we love them. Let's after we leave here, let's get our phones out and text them, say, hey, listen, I love you so much. And let them know why. Tell them what about them that you love so much. Be specific. It doesn't matter that you didn't hear it growing up. And maybe you need to call and have that talk with your parents too if they're around. I know it's tough. Father's Day can be really tough. Mother's Day can be tough too. But God's working in people's lives, and I know that I really believe that the best is yet to come for your family and for mine. So the last thing I want to say before we get out of here is, listen, if you're here and you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, that's where it starts. I promise you, you will never be the dad that God wants you to be